Well, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you so much for coming. It's always a joy to do these after quite a few years of this project, so thank you for supporting this. And I'm pretty happy with what we've got here for a program. And I want to say thanks to a few people before I get started. And we have Nicole Hassewander is back there working, and Penny Patterson, haven't seen her, but instrumental in what I've done through the years. And Morgan Gray and Kate Salter and Allie Lutinger. I'm sorry, I screwed that one up. And Trish Gates, you'll see her at the reception. She's been a big help for this project too. And of course, Stephanie Shea, who's back there. Without, I wouldn't really be doing what I do. If I did, it wouldn't be as well done. So I'm really grateful for Stephanie for being a part of all this, all these years, last few years. So thank you, Stephanie. Appreciate that. And of course, I want to say special thanks to Bill Linton. I've known him over 40 years, and if you walk outside and look around, everything you see is because of Bill Linton's vision. And we're all sitting here because of what he has put together. So I'm really proud to be a part of what's going on at Promega in this campus and supporting the arts. And, you know, with Promega, arts are part of who we are. And I feel really proud to be a part of that really big picture. It's growing. It's just amazing to see what was cornfields when I lived out here to what's happening here. So particular big thanks to Bill Linton. And I guess if you don't know who Bill Linton is, then talk to me later. But so anyway, this project is about art science, and it's something that we did in 2001. We did this project then, and where this is the card, and I had the idea of every scientist I talked to here had wanted to be an artist. And I thought, well, that's interesting. So then I pursued artists whose work reflected the sciences, which just kind of includes everybody that's an artist. And so I put this panel together of these people, and you know, there's Todd Siler, who's here, is from MIT, and we had someone from Michigan State, Robert Root Bernstein, and someone from Notre Dame, and someone from UW, and a medical doctor from Cleveland, Lisa Meek, that gave up a medical practice to be an artist, and this panel. And this was my first symposium that I did here. And unfortunately, with an hour, I gave everybody 5 minutes to talk. So they kind of had to get to the point, which is great. You know, it was really fantastic. And so I've been in touch with Todd Siler through all these years, and he's followed what we've done here, and I've followed what he's done. And there's a similar progression of creativity and states of consciousness, and art science has always been something that he has worked with. So I was really glad to have the opportunity to bring him back and include a couple of really great local artists. And so we got 3 different voices on the same thing of art science. And you know, it's just really great to have this program. And even the music tonight, if you look out there, it's Mushka playing a theremin. So that's also art science. And I look at, sometimes there's a perspective of science and art science, however you want. Like, my perspective is more the art to science and things. So if you look at our logo, so we have the Promega logo. That's this logo here is based upon the double helix. And the truth is, nobody really knows what it looks like. We know a lot of things it doesn't look like, and we know its function. And this, if you imagine, this is like a slice of the double helix, our logo. So the art is the language of science. And that's a simple case to look at it. And then if you look at from the other side, there's a fellow in here, Eric Bailey's is sitting up there. He calls himself the photochemist. He's a really fantastic photographer who works with 19th century photo processes. And so for him, the science is the language of how he gets to his art. And so we have perspectives, but they coexist, and they can't exist without each other. So this is kind of my starting point, and maybe the artists will completely contradict me on that. But whatever, that was how I came to put both of these projects together. And the first one was also monumental in what I do here, because it was kind of me doing artwork in a science environment. And that symposium really tied us all together. I learned a lot about that and the acceptance that I gained from that, and how I incorporated what I do more and more with things happening here at Promega. So that was really an important step for me, that first symposium that I did. So anyway, without much further ado, I'm going to introduce the first artist. And that artist is Monica Cliff, and she will explain herself. So have a round for Monica. Thank you.
Hola, good afternoon. My name is Monica Cliff, and I feel very honored to be here with all of you in this event. I especially want to thank Daniel Swarner for inviting me to participate in this very important event, and to Stephanie Shea for working with us to make sure we offer a great event today for all of you. And of course, thank you so much to Promega for supporting the arts by hosting this 2023 Spring Art Showcase. Their support makes a big impact in the local community of artists. When Daniel first approached me about showing some of my artwork in this event, I felt very flattered. And at the same time, I wasn't sure what to show here. He told me that the theme of the exhibition was ArtScience of Innovation. And while I am a visual artist, I was not sure how my work was tied to science and innovation. And then I remembered that I do know the importance of art in the science of well-being. And this is the work I have been focusing on for the past 3 years. Let me share a little bit about me. I was born and raised in Zacatepec, Morelos, Mexico. It's a very small town with a large agricultural industry, primarily sugarcane, since there is a sugarcane factory in the middle of our town. My parents are both engineers. I have 2 brothers, and they are both engineers. And the rest of my extended family members, most of them are engineers. So, yeah, I always joke that I think that we have all the engineerings out there just in our family, but not me. I was a kid that knew her vocation was different since I was in kindergarten, and I was certain I wanted to be an artist. So as a child, I remember loving all types of art so much. I was often mesmerized by drawings, paintings, animations, comics, puppets, theater plays, costumes, and anything creative. The art world was enchanting to me, and I wanted to be part of that. The activities I enjoyed the most as a child were those activities where I could use my creativity and my artistic skills. So every time I saw an art piece, I wondered the same thing. How did they do that? I studied the pieces and I tried to recreate the techniques with different art materials. And I was very, very lucky that my parents noticed this passion of mine at an early age and always supported me and helped me foster my creative skills by enrolling me in private art classes. Whenever I did art, I was able to feel that somehow time stretched or sometimes stopped. It was almost like a meditative state of mind, and I always felt recharged emotionally after practicing art. So when the time came for me to decide a career for college, I decided to apply to the National School of Theater in Mexico to study a bachelor's degree in scenography, which is all about stage design, costumes, props, etc. So I moved to Mexico City to follow my dreams in hopes to become a professional artist. Not too long after I graduated from college, I moved to Madison, and I worked as a contractor artist with several local theater companies such as Madison Opera, Children's Theater of Madison, Theater Lila, among others. And I became a mom of 2 amazing kids. During the time I worked as an artist here in Madison, I noticed a few things. There were not enough opportunities for the Spanish-speaking community to enjoy artistic programming and events in Spanish. And there were not many local artists, women of color, working in theater. And it became apparent that being a full-time artist was usually a struggle, especially if you have a family. Most artists work more than one job to support themselves and their families. So with these thoughts in mind, I went back to school to study a master's degree in social innovation and sustainability leadership at Edgewood College. I graduated in 2022, and my main objectives were finding a way to participate in the co-creation of community well-being through the arts, and finding sustainable ways to do it as a Mexican immigrant woman artist. So one of the areas I have been focusing is in gender equity. In this series of paintings, Mujeres, Women, that you will see, I explore the concept of gender in Latin America with a lens of equity and well-being. I am curious to understand what builds a stronger social fabric that creates the sense of community well-being. What makes a good life? What makes families and communities stay together and thrive? So for a long time, I have reflected about the important, historically unrecognized and silent role the women in our community have played for our communities to stay together, grow, and move forward. Many define this silent work as the emotional labor, which is essential to raise well-rounded human beings. This work is often unseen until no one is doing it anymore. This work is demanding and draining. I have observed how the women in our community take care of each other emotionally, and how the meaning of societal happiness transforms over time in prioritizing contentment and peace of mind, knowing that you did the best you could do for others. In these paintings, I want to portray different emotions that I believe are necessary to experience well-being. I include a diversity of ages in the portraits because I am convinced that the beauty of women never fades with age, and representing that intentionally is important to create equity. I also want to explore the beauty and strength of indigenous women that have been historically underrepresented in art. They are responsible for the preservation of our cultural roots, traditions, and language across Latin America. The paintings you see here are reflexión and dualidad, reflection and duality. Many of our habits and patterns of behavior are buried in our subconscious. They create our mindsets and biases. They create narratives in our minds that dictate how we feel and act, often hurting our well-being. One way to access our unconscious is through self-reflection that can help understand and know ourselves better. The painting Reflection intends to capture this moment. The next painting, Duality, intends to explore the social construct of motherhood, instilling women since childhood by becoming caregivers as sisters. The duality that we sometimes feel when we try to create a different identity from the one society assigned us. Duality refers to two components, often with competing or contradicting opposites. Embracing duality can help balance the contradictions in life to achieve harmony. The paintings you see here are Sabiduría and Dicha, wisdom and joy. The painting Sabiduría, wisdom, represents the richness and diversity of thoughts accumulated throughout a lifetime. The thoughts and experiences are represented by the different strokes of paint color, and the elder woman represents the passing of time. Wisdom involves an integration of knowledge, deep understanding, and experiences. It brings a new awareness and a sense of balance and acceptance in our lives. The painting Dicha, joy, represents the result of experiencing the previous emotions in the painting. It is not happiness, but more like contentment. Joy is fundamentally about connection. It exists to reinforce our important relationships with others. When we experience joy collectively, our social bonds become stronger. The painting Herencia, heritage, represents in a very symbolic way, my view of the importance of the physical and emotional labor women provide to preserve community, traditions, and culture. At the center of the painting, you see an elder woman stringing together a long white string that also represents roots. She's keeping together knowledge, people, culture, and traditions. She's also supporting on her back a bag with a group of girls. This represents how the well-being of the younger generations is built on the back of the older generations. This woman is sitting by 3 stone masks. These represent identities women had to embrace. The green jade mask represents fertility. The broken mask to the right represents how women had to deconstruct some traditions in our culture to be able to thrive. And the mask on the bottom represents new cultural constructions that can serve as a base for new beginnings. The hand to the left is a consistent reach to the light, to knowledge, the desire for well-being. The sun and the moon represent the duality, the feminine and masculine energies that we are still trying to organize in our identities. And finally, the smiley elder woman on the left represents the ability to enjoy life as it comes and teach the way to the new generations by embodying contentment and the ability to enjoy the simple things in life. I guess that if I learned something most cultures have in common is the desire to ensure the well-being of our offsprings. That is the heritage, the legacy we want to leave behind. All the paintings in this series are acrylic paintings on canvas. But you are probably wondering how exactly the arts are so important to community well-being. Well, let me tell you about Inventiva Works, the social enterprise I started 2 years ago in Madison. Inventiva Works started offering free theater classes in Spanish for kids, youth, and adults during the pandemic. We created a safe space for social connection and artistic exploration for the Spanish-speaking community. We later added visual art classes for all ages. The classes have been embraced by our community, and we have been painting and creating for 2 years now. Many of our adult participants said that the last time they drew or painted anything was when they were in elementary school. So we created an opportunity for families to get together to create and paint. Creativity is a muscle that we all need to exercise. Human beings are the only animal that shows signs of creativity. We can imagine things and we can express them to others in an art form. We have evidence of earlier art form expressions, such as the cave paintings that date for more than 40,000 years ago. This means that thanks to the artistic expressions of human beings in the past, we can have a retrospective look that connects our human experience in history. We know our own history thanks to the artists. And lastly, I just want to say, why will science be without creativity? Science is creative. Scientists need to imagine new questions, new ways of explaining theories, and new frontiers. And art is the gym that helps exercising that creative muscle. So let's create more intentional opportunities to practice art and creativity because it's good for all of us. And it has been a pleasure to share this space and moment with you. And if you want to learn more about my work, please visit my website. You can see pictures and videos of my previous projects, pictures of our classes, and if you would like to help, you can spread the word about the work I do. You can like us on Facebook, follow us on Instagram, and you can email me at any time. I would like to thank you for your attention, and I am happy to answer any questions at the end of the conference at the gallery. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Monica. That was fantastic. So next up is Nastia Craig, and she is a visual artist and freelance interior designer at Pink House Designs. So welcome, Nastia. Thank you.
Hello. Hello. My name is Nastia Craig, and before we begin, I would like to thank Promega Corporation for hosting this showcase and providing support for artists and other creatives in the area. It is hard to overestimate the importance of such support and enrichment it brings to life our local community. I truly appreciate the chance to display some of my works here and in this beautiful facility and discuss them with you today. And I also wanted to give big thanks and shout out to Danielle and Stephanie, who make this event happen, who been absolutely amazing to work with, and just wanted to thank you both again for your encouragement and support. Thank you very much. And now we can proceed with the presentation. Thank you for inviting me to talk with you today as we are celebrating innovation in science and art and discussing how these disciplines relate to one another. At a first glance, science and art don't seem to have a lot in common. Science, for once, relies on rational thinking and precision. However, in order to make a real breakthrough in science, one needs to employ imagination, curiosity, and the ability to envision something that doesn't yet exist. This is where you can see how science can draw inspiration from art. Artists, similarly to scientists, have methods, techniques, tools, and routines. They appreciate experimentation, but also aim to have control over the medium and produce consistent results. At the same time, artists are the people who have an ability to look at the world through a different lens and see its physical parameters. They're seeking for deeper understanding of human experience, reflecting this understanding in their creativity. Artists can take a blank surface and fill it with a new reality, reflecting their internal vision. We artists know that our work might not always be perfect, but we accept this imperfection and build on it as we continue to evolve in our practice. When science employs similar approaches, the world sees new inventions and new innovative ways for people to interact with each other. In this way, scientists and artists are similar. Please allow me to tell a little bit more about my own artistic journey, what drives it, and a little bit about myself as well. Born and raised in Odessa, Ukraine, I came to the US at the age of 17 to study interior design, moving to New York and then here to Madison, where I eventually decided to stay. I'm a mixed media artist. I create abstract collages from painted polyester film cut into layers and arranged on a substrate to form a composition. These abstract works are not representational, but rather are meant to appeal and resonate on an emotional level. As I started making collage artwork out of the layers of painted media, I realized the similarity between this process and how we as human beings come to build perceptions, judgments, outlooks, making who we are as individuals. We are all made of layers of our experiences, events, memories, emotions, layers of our roles in society, certain characteristics, habits, beliefs, and interests. Take me as an example. When I came to the US, my whole life and family stayed behind, and I had to figure out my own place between the two very different cultures. Over the past 4 years, like many of us, I've been living through the significant events of the global pandemic, economic turmoil, and most personally, the terrible war aggression in my homeland. All these factors have been compiling within me as layers of my existence, shaping who I am and how I see things. My art is built in the same manner, layer upon layer, color upon color, and line upon another line. With a closer look at my work, you will probably note that the top layer appears the most prominent because of its proximity to the surface. But there's plenty tucked behind and hidden that we don't see as clearly, and yet it is also an integral part of the whole picture. And what if you were to take all those layers and rearrange them in a different order? The components could be the same, but it would be a different picture, wouldn't it? Understanding this reveals the beauty and deeper meaning of the layers in art and layers within us. When I'm thinking about my art process, I see it as a conversion of chaos to order and a search for harmony within dissonance. This too brings up many parallels between art and other aspects of life. In the very beginning of the art process, or scientific process, artists and scientists are presented with the emptiness, the big void of a blank canvas or other surface that needs to be filled, or a question that needs to be answered. For art, how am I going to fill this space? For science, how am I going to figure out this query? For art, what materials will I use? For science, what point am I trying to prove? The emptiness of the beginning of any project can feel intimidating and uncertain because there is nothing to work off, nothing to see or relate to. It is a bare loneliness of non-existence, and it will only cease to be when someone takes the first step and starts interacting with the journey of creation. A very first step in my own process is to fill that emptiness by introducing chaos. Many people think of chaos as a negative term. And yes, it can be turbulent, violent, and unruly. But in my mind, it's neither good nor bad. Many times, chaos can even be exciting and beautiful. Chaos represents a raw mass, a primordial soup of sorts, in which hides opportunity. Opportunity in that which is yet to be organized, to be arranged, and to be implemented into something that wasn't there before. Finding that order can be a joyful experience on its own. In my art process, the creative chaos is expressed as paintings and drawings that I create using my intuition. I then cut up the paintings and drawings into loose bits of pieces and bring these elements back together in a new way. After many years of practice, I learned to trust my internal guides in this stage, as I listen to how the feeling of the piece speaks to me. A lot of time, I sense that the artwork tells me what it wants, like combining certain colors or carving out specific shapes. I typically follow these notions without much conscious intervention, because I know that this pull is coming from somewhere deep within, and it is a feeling that needs to find its expression. After the basis of the piece has been defined, that's when I actually switch more towards analytical thinking and start making decisions on whether something needs to be edited or better detailed. The goal of this stage is about finding balance in the chaos and defining the equilibrium between the parts and pieces, as well as between intuition and logic, the raw and the refined, the subconscious and the conscious, allowing the artwork to benefit from the best of both facets. The final stage, and sometimes the hardest one, is recognizing that this is time to stop. The difficulty here lies in the attachment to working on the same piece as opposed to something new, a tendency to stay within the comfort zone and the familiarity of a now-filled space, and not wanting to return to the fearsome stage of the empty canvas. And yet, it is important to realize that something might be imperfect, or not as we exactly imagined it will turn out, but it can simultaneously be beautiful and complete, and it is time to move on. I usually finish my work by putting a resin seal on it that encapsulates everything, and that's when it officially is born, so to speak, and the piece has a life of its own. Now I want to go back to the idea of chaos and order, as well as some of my personal experiences. If we draw a parallel between the art world and the real world, we can suggest that most global or personal events occurring daily have elements of chaos and sometimes remind us of a pile of messy pieces of disordered things tossed together. Can we try to look at these little scraps of disordered bits and find solutions to how we can cope with chaos and even perhaps come to benefit from what it brings? Take, for example, the pandemic, which most of us experienced as a big shakeup. It has been turbulent, uncertain, scary, and unknown. Not only because of many risks and losses, but also because it has created a world we didn't yet know how to live in. But within that chaos, many started finding something positive. Maybe it was more time to spend with loved ones, or time to finally have a conversation with oneself, to ask questions if the way we had been living still made sense, or if changes to our own lives were needed. It was during that question phase, the chaos phase of the pandemic, I finally decided I had been putting something very important to me, art, on a back burner for way too long. That is when I concluded that if I don't give it time and attention it deserves right now, then I'll keep losing years to build my practice, hone my skills, find my voice, and one day it will be too late to start all that. So I made a greater shift towards working on my art more seriously and as a bigger part of my life. Then the war in Ukraine. That's an example of chaos in its worst. And yet, what can be possibly positive about the ruthless, meaningless bloodshed that brings devastation and grief every single day? Since it unfolded in 2022, I saw many examples of solidarity, bravery, strength, friendship, and support. Even here in Madison, where I lived for 20 years and hadn't interacted with too many Ukrainian people previously, I suddenly saw a new community of Madison Ukrainians form within months, finding common ground and purpose of bringing best effort to help and support people in our mutual homeland. And it is not only here, but in other places too, when I see that Ukrainians acquired a deep appreciation for the language, culture, origin, and worth. So maybe in this kind of chaos, one can build order and find goodness. I guess the takeaway here is that life will go on, and we're all destined to have our own share of experiences that will shape our perceptions and define how we look at reality. Each of us faces their own chaos every day, and sometimes the big emptiness too. With art, I hope to find means to break free from the emptiness and actually see the great potential of the chaos. And where one might only see struggle and uncertainty, to see the opportunity and joy of the discovery. Hopefully, you will be able to find some of these notions in my works as you observe them around this facility. I can outline a few of them and their personal meaning the way I see it. Take, for instance, artwork with the peculiar name Saltwater Jam. It actually reminds me of my childhood in Ukraine and brings up simultaneously two different associations. Playing on the beach in my native Odessa and picking up different varieties of seaweed from water to study the leaf shapes and colors. Then later that day, I would be coming home to my mom making strawberry jam when strawberries would be in season. Those two distinct smells, the salty air and the sweet aroma of strawberries cooked in our kitchen, are somehow triggered very vividly from my past and come up when I look at this collage work. The artwork Nuclear Cataclysm poses questions about the power of nuclear energy and how it can both help improve life, but can pose a great threat. Something that became very critical in a recent year during occupation of nuclear plant premises in Ukraine by Russians. The cosmic dunes, on the other hand, evokes a sensation of walking the extraplanetary dreamscape in another world. One can only ponder about the universe beyond our ability to see and what secrets it holds. Perhaps once you look at these works with your own eyes, you can find something for yourself that I didn't think about. I invite you to walk around, experience these artworks, and see if you find a piece that resonates with you personally and talks to you. Perhaps it will trigger a certain memory or association with a person in your life, an experience you shared together. Maybe it's not even a big event, but a slight glimpse to a subconscious or a feeling. But whatever it is, I hope it will make you feel curious and inspired. Thank you.
Wow, thank you. That was, anyway, so So far, nobody's contradicted me yet, but there's one more chance here. So anyway, last but not least is my old friend Todd Siler, who is a man who needs no introduction, but I'm going to do it anyway. In 1986, Todd Siler became the first visual artist to be awarded a doctorate from MIT in recognition for his exploratory work in the field of interdisciplinary studies in psychology and art. He also received a Master's of Science in Visual Studies from MIT's Center for Advanced Visual Studies in 1981. In 2011, the World Council awarded Todd the Leonardo da Vinci Award for Arts of Arts. Siler's artworks are in the public collections, including the Solomon Guggenheim Museum, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the Museum of Modern Art, and the Whitney Museum of Art, and many others. Todd has a Forum Fellow and an art presenter at the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland. His publications include Breaking the Mind Barrier, Thinking Like a Genius, and both books have been translated into many foreign languages. So without further ado, my old friend, Todd Siler. Thank you.
Thanks, buddy. Well, thank you. And it's fantastic to be here some 22 years later and to see this evolution. And I'm grateful to Promega. I'm grateful to Daniel. We've had this conversation that has kind of gone over the decades here. And I'm certainly grateful for the vision behind Promega, which is so critical. And also the architect we have, David Rosso, is sitting here and enjoying this. So my whole world has really been since early childhood about seeing this integration between art and science. And, we have this sense that, in art, anything can go because imagination goes with everything, if you think about it, right? And it's not simply what we make, it's what we make of it, how we interpret it, and with it, how we apply it. And so my whole life, I've always kind of seen this confluence. And if you notice the whole image here, the bridge, and going back to Da Vinci, we arc back because that's really the origin, one of the origins, Da Vinci, Galilei, who started the scientific method. We use it in so many different ways, and artists use it. So this talk, I'll be brief and kind of cover a lot of territory, is really about the art of science and the science that's actually embedded in art. And often we don't see it, but our two speakers laid it out beautifully, and they talked about the importance of emotion and how our emotions really play into all this. So all of my work, I would say, just is about realizing human potential and using every tool and means to do that. And early in my evolution, I always saw this concatenation. It wasn't art and science. It was this real confluence. And we started a program years ago when I moved to Denver, and it was for K through 12. We wanted to actually integrate this integrative thinking, this way of combining our different ways of looking at the world and representing the world and expressing ourselves in a way that would kind of enable us to talk beyond the categories of compartmentalized knowledge that we've had. And so this program was about that. And I would make artworks like this one that's 36 feet long, and it has this exploding canvas that's representing an instant of intuition that a poet can have, an engineer can have, and there's a huge sound system that kind of builds to a crescendo, and it explodes at the moment with this brilliant light that fuses those paintings. And it's called Breaking the Mind Barrier. It's about also breaking our prejudices, our biases, our ways of looking at the world, and kind of seeing a point of connection between how we see the world and how we express ourselves and interact and connect with one another in it. So I spent a lifetime trying to look at how could we see the essence of intuition, reasoning, how we use our curiosity? What would that look like inside us? It's kind of from the inside out. If you were able to see and be able to see a moment when you're having that epiphany, that eureka. Again, whether you're an artist, scientist, homemaker, regardless, you're having that moment. And so I built, this was the visual component of my doctorate at MIT. And you kind of needed roller skates. It's here shown at the Museum of Modern Art in Paris to see it, because it looks like a giant EEG. If you look at it, it looks like, electroencephalogram there. And as you move along that line of intuition and you stop on any given frame, so there's representational work, abstract work. If you think about it and you abstract that work, it kind of moves, it becomes more artistic, we would say. And as you analyze that work, it gets more scientific. But they come full circle, and that circle becomes like a strip of DNA. That piece, I spent a lot of years thinking about how to actually show that piece properly and how to represent it inside us. Every human being, our 8 billion people on the planet. You're looking at the heart of the brain. I didn't exaggerate that. It's a sagittal view. If you don't mind, I'll just talk about it that way. And sort of this is where you put both different hats on here. But I wanted to actually put you inside that experience and say, imagine seconds of thinking, or milliseconds of thinking about the interactions of art and science and so forth. And so my work was about talking about the neuropsychology of that, science of that, but also how we might represent that and experience that and organize that. So it's, this was one interpretation and lots of years thinking about it, building it, because my life really, when people ask me where my studio is, and I jokingly say it's really my mind, all of our minds are like giant RD labs. They're always open to wonder with imagination, because I'm always building things in all kinds of spaces. And the questions that have obsessed me, and I have to point this out, it says, in every human brain, in the heart of the brain, our intuitions, feelings, emotions are integrated and interpreted in this region. And I won't get into the neuroscience of it, but I love that neuroscience, and I'm so passionate about it. And the science absolutely inspires the art. And so my art really is about, talking about and representing the brain. But the brain is everything that we make, every single creation. So my questions that I've given me over a lifetime, it seems, and 40 years seems like a long time, but when you look at the history of thought, it's less than milliseconds, but for me, how is the brain connected to everything it creates? And how are these analogs, these things, we're constantly trying to learn how we innovate, why we're curious, all those fundamental things that make us human beings. And you would get deeper. How are all of our creations connected to nature? And how does nature connect everything it creates? I'm interested in that in a very deep level, like the why and the how, and actually see it. How do we show it? How do we make it tangible? And so these questions come to me, and I'm raising them constantly to everyone I can speak to and to think about. And more specifically, in the piece you just saw, how do the neural mechanisms of thought influence the contents of thought? We don't know these things, and we're trying to understand these things at a very deep level, and we especially now are trying to understand them because of all of the advanced technology that's enabling us to actually put the sum of human knowledge together and mine it and do all the data mining and stuff that we're seeing and hearing about. So these questions are voraciously being addressed, on many levels. So I want to make one point. We've heard this for almost 2,000 years. I always say if mathematics is the language of nature, well, the symbolism is the very nature of language itself. And that's beyond math. It's beyond all the things that we can't quantitate. And they're things that enable the artists to have a very important presence and say, almost like what Warren Cullum, a wonderful neuropsychologist, said when he introduced a new theory, don't bite my finger, look where I'm pointing. And so, it's kind of like the artist is often seeing and gleaning things and understanding that there is a pattern and patterns in nature that we may not be able to articulate in words and numbers, but we're able to give form to them in a way that's very, very fundamental. And so I always say the language of nature is actually more than, this language of nature with its myriad forms and manifestations. So for me, over these years, art has become all representations of thought, using every tool, every medium, every means that we have to communicate, to understand, to ask questions of ourselves. And it's very deep and uses all these different things. So some years ago, as I'm painting and drawing and sculpting and doing all kinds of things in my work, if you will ever take a look at them, from paintings and drawings and prints, I come across an individual in 2001 in Estonia who was getting the Albert Einstein Award. We're both kind of side by side looking in parallel worlds, looking at each other's work before we get our awards and stuff. And this fellow had written a book on nanochemistry, but he thought like an artist about his chemistry. And it was so beautiful to actually see. And what has evolved from nanochemistry and nanoscience and technology, they owe to this fellow, Richard Feynman, who wrote a wonderful paper, a parent paper about, this room at the bottom, you can build from atom up. And I was introduced, through the work of Jeffrey Ozen, who works in Toronto and works worldwide, who is enabling me to actually see how scientists think and work in a metaphorical way. And I have to read this to you just in case. It's just the essence. The images that scientists have as they do science are metaphorical. The imagination, the faculty, is set in motion by mental metaphor. Metaphor shifts the discourse, not gradually, but with a vengeance. And you see what no one had seen before. And so Roald Hoffmann, who is a Nobel Prize winner, actually is a poet too. And I cannot tell you, having worked at MIT for so long, with people who are from pure math, from every discipline imaginable, if you heard them wax, envision, talk about what they do as artists, as scientists, as engineers, as people just thinking about the world, you would honestly, if it weren't for the specialized languages that we use, you'd say, wow, we have a very shared common human nervous system that we build on. That is important because, on the human scale, that is important. So I wrote these books some years ago about how genius is everywhere, every day, in everyone, in every way imaginable. And I mean from the genes up. And this was just not an abstraction. This grew, and it wasn't a theory, it grew from watching children and people who, many of whom had trouble learning, when they were given the means and tools and basic to actually manifest what they were envisioning, genius, what they would build. It was unbelievable from all cultures. And so I did this work, and that work influenced some of the drawings and paintings and things you see around, the prints and things that you see around that are about what I call this art nano innovations, that are really looking at how we can build from atom up the various things that we kind of are envisioning. And these pieces, I have to read this. You'll see this out in the hall. It says, nature invents and human nature innovates. And Jeff Ozen had said, nature did it first. Nature has solved the problem of designing and synthesizing materials with structures that have been optimized to make them hard, tough, and strong enough to house, protect, embrace living organisms. Optimization of these properties, refined by slow evolutionary engineering, serves to enhance the chances of survival. So part of the drawings you see there were conversations I had over many years about, we have a periodic table of elements. They're finite. And he was inspiring me by saying, well, we have an infinite, we can create periodic tables of nanomaterials that are 1 to 100 nanometers. And from that, you can take a single atom and make an infinite number of nanomaterials from it. So by building from the size of it, the shape, the surface, the way it self-organizes, the degree of imperfection, and its utility. And from those combinations of those 6 concepts, you can, make these nanowires and nanocrystals and tubes and sheets. I won't get into it. You can simply Google and look at this, but I do hope when you look at the artwork around, here it's like taking a single atom and building atom clusters and then nanomaterials to materials. So pretty much all of the things we see in our built-in natural environment are, have this basic building blocks and structures to them. So I won't get into much more about this. I just would like to share with you that some very basic building blocks can be used to replicate all kinds and synthesize things that nature makes. And that was part of the whole exploration of work that we've been doing over the last 12 years. And the nanomaterials and things that are used pretty much in, there is so much technology that use them, from your cell phones to our solar cells to capacitors to every kind of technology now that's looking at ways to kind of be optimized, So these paintings, like something like that is about, to give you a sense of scale, is like 6 feet by about 12 feet. And I was interested in trying to show the motion, the something forming over, billions of a second, these billions of, on a nanoscale to times where you're building nanocrystals and wires and tubes and sheets and things to be applied in lots of different ways. So the neural-like texture that you see in the paintings upstairs, if you look around them, MIT had patented this for me because it's a process that's a design and painting process that allows me to make massive monotypes, single sheets that are 200 feet long and 12 feet high, and use a very different printing technology. They want to use it for security printing. I just wanted to use it for my art, to make art, period. So these are, some of the art installations you see. And again, they're looking at and trying to dimensionalize things that are a billionth of a meter. They're so tiny, you need like a tunneling optic microscope to actually see them. I just wanted to enlarge them and kind of compress them and actually see what you would need this technology, to see it without the technology, to interpret it, to intuit it. And that's what these constructions, that's like a big nanotube that, is almost, 3 billion times our to scale. And you can see that there's a lot of abstraction, but when you go into it, there's written material and thoughts and things that are actually, written on the surfaces of these materials to bring you into on a detailed level, because, as you say, the details reveal everything. And if you look at how every detail of nature details human nature, that is something that has intrigued me, and so I would show these works. There's my collaborator. He would, feed me the resource, the conceptual framework, and allow me to riff off this as in designing these. So when you go up to this painting upstairs, look closely at the surface, and those are relief-like surfaces, and they're painted from both sides. And literally, the structures and things that you'll see in them are actually embedded between the back and front. They're part of it. So it's they're looking at how we invent artificial photosynthesis, nanoleaves, and so they're thinking about, well, what shape do these leaves have? How would we know which ones would be optimal to use if we're envisioning and building them? And so the paintings themselves are my reflection. They're my way of asking more questions. They're my way of posing questions and interpreting them and being open. But honestly, after years of working on these things, I regard myself as an expert novice. I suspend what I know in order to discover what I don't know. And there's a whole lot that we don't know that are just all about that open-ended question, these series of open-ended questions. Just have to point this thing back. I use this word, and you'll hear it, and if you look at the books, I left some books out there. Some years ago, I wrote books about what I call process morphology. Things that are alike in process, but they're unlike in form or appearance. And I don't mean biomimicry per se. And there's a difference. And when you hear people say, so-and-so was like a hurricane or a tornado or whatever, that may give you a little hint at this process morphology, is that we don't look like those things, but we work in many ways like these things. And so like things that nature is and embodies. So I wanted to, many years ago, do a comparative study of likeness in different systems that that we're able to build like this. It doesn't have to look like a leaf to work like a leaf, to use the properties of the leaf. So that was part of why this is about the art, science, and innovation. And it was about kind of studying that and exploring that and coming up with concepts that we were trying to translate. And that piece, that ribbon, you'll see the scale of the works. That's going to be about 1 mile long. And when it's presented, though, I'm going to make it the size of a dust particle. So the actual physical scale, right? And I want to position it at the Museum of Modern Art in front of Duchamp's wonderful, his movable portable library. And I thought, how appropriate, right, to have something on this enormous scale where you can actually go and look and see the whole evolution of both the science and the projections of how it's going to be used in everything from artificial intelligence and computers and all the various things that technology we are, obsessing over and building over. A word about art science. I wrote about this concept and practice and how it is used in real life, everyday life. And it's something that is so special to me because I think it's so much part of what we do as innovators. We are all what I call metafarmers, lifelong learners, creators, problem solvers, inventors, and communicators and collaborators. And so for me, it is sort of the future of where I see this confluence heading, and that, ultimately we will need to put the sum of our intelligences, the way we look at the world and approach the way we communicate with each other, and to build those kinds of bridges between our ways of looking at the world and expressing ourselves. So I have a shout out to my group at the Center for Advanced Visual Studies and their work, because they proliferated lots of art schools that integrate art, science, technology all over the world. And I just, I want to end with this note, because this is really what it is about for all of us in a way. That beauty and truth, for me, are nature's gifts to humankind. Art and science are how we use those gifts, and hopefully we'll use them wisely, and we'll use them in a way where we're listening to one another differently, and we're interacting and we're connecting differently with one another. And that is the larger message at the moment, but there's a lot to follow. So thank you.
The earliest memories I have of being really enchanted about art was in kindergarten. I remember that there was a festival in my kindergarten and our teachers brought a puppet show. Like it was the Three Little Pigs and the Big Bad Wolf. And I remember that I wanted to see how the puppets were moving, and I kept peeking and like behind the puppet theater.
I have been doing art since I was a child. My parents, of course, wanted me to try all sorts of different things. They wanted me to play piano and other things, but art was something I just was always going back to over and over again. So I went through a lot of different stages of just different art. I actually have not been painting abstract for that long. I was more interested in surreal and fantasy realism.
Ever since I was a little kid, I loved the visual arts, art history, and biology and medicine, and I always saw this beautiful confluence. I never really separated them. They were inseparable, actually. It's like the brain is an integrated matrix. I would frame my work around art science productions, and my work is about the art science of innovation.
I kind of started getting a little bit more practical about, what am I doing, but also because I am doing interior design. So it was kind of, I think the designer in me started kind of taking over because of the way the design process works, how you take a space and you start carving in the shapes out of it, how you position elements within the space, where you put walls, where do you put circulation. It's just that kind of a process of organizing the interior. I think it kind of maybe brought me to the process of this collage, how you assemble these loose pieces into something holistic and something that looks complete.
I come from a small town in Mexico, so we didn't have art classes in our town, but they enrolled me into the next city available with art classes, which we had to drive 45 minutes just to get to the art classes. My parents were really supportive from the beginning. For me, that was sort of like that level of intensity and passion, like that I showed that I could just do all my chores at home, so I could just like get that as a reward.
Well, they're all about the integration of how we intuit things, how we construct our ideas, how we have inspirations that draw from just curiosity, wonder, about how phenomena work, certain phenomena. And the paintings are really meant, you're looking at a snapshot of something in motion. They're multidimensional. Think of them as 11-dimensional, many, many, many dimensions to them, and they're in a state of transition. And so they're meant to be almost like looking at a composite of a film, and if you were to see them in motion, they would be shifting and changing and nothing static. So they're the opposite of a two-dimensional, even though they're prints or drawings or paintings and things, but they're created with layers of paint, layers of drawing, layers of information that are actually embedded in the painting.
I think for me, the color is very important. I'm a rather emotional person. I kind of feel very deeply the sadness, the joy, the excitement, and I think that's why my works are always kind of bursting with colors and loud, and so I kind of hope that it will get people energized and excited about what they see.
I have 5 pieces available in this show. They are like the most realistic pieces that you will see. In the series I call Mujeres, Women, which is about portraying more like Latin American women and their diversity, with like showing different emotions that had to do with what I consider the key ingredients for community well-being, and also sort of portraying the hard work that women, especially the indigenous women in our communities, do to keep alive traditions and culture, which is something that I am deeply grateful as an immigrant, and I learned to not only embrace but appreciate a lot better being in a whole different country and culture. It just became like everything from food to like the folk arts to the music, everything, right? To like clothing. So it is my way to give a little homage to them. So
Buckminster Fuller said it best: start with the universe. Any subcategorization of it is arbitrary. And all these systems are working together in a connected way. And so I always saw that and didn't understand why we would separate things in such rigid ways and then create, barriers between different fields of study and so forth.
Once it's done, I usually try to look at that and see what is it bringing out for me. And hopefully people will be able to do the same thing, because I think we all have our own memories, our own associations with places, things, people, and maybe, this piece, for instance, that I was talking about, nucleic cataclysm and the nuclear energy, maybe somebody will see something completely different in that, and that's okay.
I think they always begin with questions. I have questions about the way the universe works, or the way nature works, or how do you see the world differently than I might experience it, or similarly? How would I know that? And so there are fundamental questions about fundamental processes happening in us, and particularly I'm interested in that deep connection with humans and nature, and that human nature, that full integration that's always present, but we don't really understand it.
Art is very subjective, and to put frames on it and say this is only this and only means that, I think it's rather limiting. So I hope people can enjoy them for themselves and make their own judgments about what they are.